have caught him, and there was no love lost between Peter and his own people for many a day. When it was all over and things had calmed down a bit, he settled in Bulawayo and used to go with me when I went on trek. At the time when I left Africa 2 years before, I had lost sight of him for months, and heard that he was somewhere on the Congo poaching elephants. He always had a great idea of making things hum so loud in Angola that the Union government would have to step in and annex it. After Rhodes, Peter had the biggest notions south of the line. He was a man of about 5'10", very thin and active, and as strong as a buffalo. He had pale blue eyes, a face as gentle as a girl's, and a soft, sleepy voice. From his present appearance, it looked as if he had been living hard lately. His clothes were of the cut you might expect to get at Lobito Bay, and he was as lean as a rake, deeply browned with the sun, and there was a lot of gray in his beard. He was 56 years old, and used to be taken for 40. Now he looked about his age. At first I asked him what he'd been up to since the war began. He spat in the Kaffir way he had, and said he'd been having hell's time. "I got hung up on the Kafue," he said. "And when I heard from old Letsitala that the white men were fighting, I had a bright idea that I might get into German southwest from the north. You see, I know that Botha couldn't keep long out of the war. Well, I got into German territory all right. And then a skellum of an officer came along and commandeered all my mules, and wanted to commandeer me with them for his full army. He was a very ugly man with a yellow face." Peter filled a deep pipe from a kudu skin pouch. "Were you commandeered?" I asked. "No. I shot him, so as not to kill but to wound badly. It was all right, for he fired first on me. Got me, too, in the left shoulder. But that was the beginning of bad trouble. I trekked east pretty fast and got over the border among the Ovamba. I have made many journeys, but that was the worst. 4 days I went without water and 6 without food. Then by bad luck I fell in with Nikitla. You remember the half-caste chief? He said I owed him money for cattle, which I bought when I came here with Karawab. It was a lie, but he held to it and would give me no transport. So I crossed the Kalahari on my feet. Ugh, it was as slow as a vrow coming from Nachtmaal. It took weeks and weeks, and when I came to Lechwe's kraal, I heard that the fighting was over and that Botha had conquered the Germans. That, too, was a lie, but it deceived me. And I went north into Rhodesia, where I learned the truth. But by then I judged the war had gone too far for me to make any profit out of it. So I went into Angola to look for German refugees. By that time I was hating Germans worse than hell." "But what did you propose to do with them?" I asked. "I had a notion they would make trouble with the government in those parts. I don't specially love the Portugoose, but I'm for him against the Germans every day. Well, there was trouble, and I had a merry time for a month or two. But by and by it petered out, and I thought I had better clear for Europe, for South Africa was settling down just as the big show was getting really interesting. So here I am, Cornelis, my old friend. If I shave my beard, will they let me join the Flying Corps?" I had looked at Peter sitting there smoking as imperturbable as if he had been growing mealies in Natal all his life and had run home for a month's holiday with his people in Peckham. "You're coming with me, my lad," I said. "We're going into Germany." Peter showed no surprise. "Keep in mind that I don't like the Germans," was all he said. "I'm a quiet Christian man, but I've the devil of a temper." Then I told him the story of our mission. "You and I have got to be Maritz's man. We went into Angola, and now we're trekking for the fatherland to get a bit of our own back from the infernal English. Neither of us knows any German publicly. We'd better plan out the fighting we were in. Kakamas will do for one, and shoot drift. You were a Nagamiland hunter before the war. They won't have your dossier, so you can tell any lie you like. I'd better be an educated Afrikander, one of Bayer's bright lads, and a pal of old Herzog. We can let our imagination loose about that part, but we must stick to the same yarn about the fighting." "Ja, Cornelis," said Peter. He had called me Cornelis ever since I had told him my new name. He was a wonderful chap for catching on to any game. "But after we get into Germany, what then? There can't be much difficulty about the beginning, but once we're among the beer swillers I don't quite see our line. We're to find out about something that's going on in Turkey. When I was a boy, the predikant used to preach about Turkey. I wish I was better educated and remembered whereabouts in the map it was." "You leave that to me," I said. I'll explain it all to you before we get there. We haven't got much of a spoor, but we'll cast about, and with luck we'll pick it up. I've seen you do it often enough when we hunted kudu on the Kafur." Peter nodded. "Do we sit still in a German town?" he asked anxiously. "I shouldn't like that, Cornelis." "We move gently eastward to Constantinople," I said. Peter grinned. "We should cover a lot of new country. You can reckon on me, friend Cornelis. I've always had a hankering to see Europe." He rose to his feet and stretched his long arms. "We'd better begin at once. God, I wonder what's happened to old Solly Maritz with his bottle face. Yon was a fine battle at the drift when I was sitting up to my neck in the orange praying that Brit's lads would take my head for a stone." Peter was as thorough a mountebank when he got started as Blenkiron himself. All the way back to Lisbon he yarned about Maritz and his adventures in German Southwest till I half believed they were true. He made a very good story of our doings, and by his constant harping on it I pretty soon got it into my memory. That was always Peter's way. He said if you were going to play a part you must think yourself into it. Convince yourself that you were it, till you really were it, and didn't act but behaved naturally. The two men who had started that morning from the hotel door had been bogus enough, but the two men that returned were genuine desperadoes itching to get a shot at England. We spent the evening piling up evidence in our favor. Some kind of republic had been started in Portugal, and ordinarily the cafes would have been full of politicians. But the war had quieted all these local squabbles, and the talk was of nothing but what was doing in France and Russia. The place we went to was a big, well-lighted show on a main street, and there were a lot of sharp-eyed fellows wandering about that I guessed were spies and police agents. I knew that Britain was the one country that doesn't bother about this kind of game, and that it would be safe enough to let ourselves go. I talked Portuguese fairly well, and Peter spoke it like a Lorenzo Marquez barkeeper, with a lot of Shangan words to fill up. He started on Curaçao, which I reckoned was a new drink to him, and presently his tongue ran freely. Several neighbors pricked up their ears, and soon we had a small crowd round our table. We talked to each other of Maritz and our doings. It didn't seem to be a popular subject in that cafe. One big blue-black fellow said that Maritz was a dirty swine who would soon be hanged. Peter quickly caught his knife wrist with one hand and his throat with the other, and demanded an apology. He got it. The Lisbon Boulevardiers have not lost any lions. After that there was a bit of a squash in our corner. Those near to us were very quiet and polite, but the outer fringe made remarks. When Peter said that if Portugal, which he admitted he loved, was going to stick to England, she was backing the wrong horse, there was a murmur of disapproval. One decent-looking old fellow who had the air of a ship's captain flushed all over his honest face, and stood up looking straight at Peter. I saw that we had struck an Englishman, and mentioned it to Peter in Dutch. Peter played his part perfectly. He suddenly shut up, and with furtive looks around him, began to jabber to me in a low voice. He was the very picture of the old stage conspirator. The old fellow stood staring at us. "I don't very well understand this damn lingo," he said. "But if so be you dirty Dutchmen are saying anything against England, I'll ask you to repeat it. And if so be as you repeats it, I'll take either of you on and knock the face off him." He was a chap after my own heart, but I had to keep the game up. I said in Dutch to Peter that we mustn't get brawling in a public house. "Remember the big thing," I said darkly. Peter nodded, and the old fellow, after staring at us for a bit, spat scornfully and walked out. "The time is coming when the Englander will sing small," I observed to the crowd. We stood drinks to one or two, and then swaggered into the street. At the door a hand touched my arm, and looking down I saw a little scrap of a man in a fur coat. "Will the gentleman walk a step with me and drink a glass of beer?" he said in very stiff Dutch. "Who the devil are you?" I asked. "Gott strafe England," was his answer, and turning back the lapel of his coat he showed some kind of ribbon in his buttonhole. "Amen," said Peter. "Lead on, friend, we don't mind if we do." He led us to a back street, and then up 2 pairs of stairs to a very snug little flat. The place was filled with fine red lacquer, and I guessed that art dealing was his nominal business. Portugal, since the Republic broke up the convents and sold up the big royalist grandees, was full of bargains in the lacquer and curio line. He filled us 2 long tankards of very good Munich beer. "Prosit," he said, raising his glass. "You are from South Africa. What make you in Europe?" We both looked sullen and secretive.